A week ago, I spoke to Mike Krieger, who leads Anthropic's labs team. And in the context of Mythos, he was saying, when you have a model this powerful, you can't actually isolate one capability. But what's so confusing about that is we are only talking about Mythos's ability to identify vulnerabilities quicker, at great expense, but that's the very narrow use case. What have you made of that?
Well, so actually, it was never in doubt that we can use AI to discover vulnerabilities. And at ISLE, we've been doing that since August 2025. We found all of the vulnerabilities in something that's been a very hard code base, like OpenSSL. We've been finding those vulnerabilities. So using AI to find vulnerabilities is not a unique capability. What I think is interesting about Mythos is it's supposed to be the most powerful model yet. And I have to say, like, there is a contention here. I disagree with that, because I think one of the things you see is that, you know, the vulnerabilities that they've actually surfaced and disclosed are not impossible to find, not with a closed source model like Mythos, but also with small, tiny, open source models. And that's incredibly significant, because Mythos has now been restricted use to only like 40 companies. They are incredibly deterministic about who gets access to it. And I think that what we should expect is that if we really want to maintain a state of security, specifically with open source security vendors, then we need to make sure that they also have the capability to do this. So one of the things that we're really intent on is releasing something open source that is comparable to finding those same kind of vulnerabilities. And we've proven that we can actually do it.
How can you, Jaya, do that safely? And do you think, therefore, that this is being done safely from a Mythos general purpose model perspective, or is it more the hype that's happening around it?
Well, I think there's always, I think with all of this stuff, there is always a degree of hype. And the real effect, you can only actually validate it when you have access to the model and you compare it to other models. But if you just take a look at the vulnerabilities that they disclosed, we can confirm that we can find those vulnerabilities, not with a closed source model from Anthropic, but an open source model like GPT 5.4. So, and that is the tiniest model that we can test with. And we can confirm that we can find those same vulnerabilities. And the reason to make this more widely available, this open source tiny LLM model, is this is something that I believe that we should always do, because defenders now globally are, worried about who else can build this. If we've already proven previously you can do this with open source, it's just a matter of time before someone else figures out how to do it. So without making it open source, we're actually giving defenders a disadvantage. And I think the real issue is, how can you get defenders up to scale globally, and not just 40 companies in Silicon Valley, but everybody on a level playing field in order to defend their stuff? So open source maintainers need to be able to find their own vulnerabilities in order to fix them.
Are attackers already looking at these smaller open source models? What have you seen, particularly as we are in the midst of a global conflict where Iran has very sophisticated cyber attackers, at least?
Yeah, I think the best example that we saw is the recent example that was, hit by towards the Mexican government, where you saw a bunch of compromise happening because of AI, because of an attacker using AI to hack the government of Mexico. So I think, we are definitely going to see more of this. I worry about, again, the ability for people who are trying to build foundational internet capabilities to have access to things, to find issues in their own code base and then defend them proactively, versus having a sort of small community only have access. I think we need to democratize this, because the building blocks of the internet are democratized. They are in the hands of everyone.
Jaya, this is the view of Bloomberg Intelligence, our in-house analysts, right? And that is that Mythos on paper, because you quite rightly point out the limited scope of access, lacks the capability to replace leading cybersecurity providers like yourself beyond vulnerability assessment, right? It's good at identifying memory corruption, logic vulnerabilities. Do you accept that that's where its limits end? Because the conversations I've had every day for 7 days is that this is a model more capable than any we've seen before.
And you know what? I think Mythos is actually doing. Let me just maybe caveat this by saying I think they're doing a really good job. I think it's hard to, though, for us to actually validate some of that it's the greatest model ever unless you can actually do it, because we can reproduce this with free. And I want to emphasize the word free here. Free open source models, the smallest models, are capable of finding the same thing. So it's not about the model. Although Anthropic makes it about the model, it's really about the system and the scaffold and everything you built around it. Because what we see is that this capability is quite jagged. So it's not good at everything equally as well. It's good at some things, like you pointed out, but it's not good at everything. And that's just something that we also see in the open source model. But given enough open source model, you can highly parallelize all of this stuff. So instead of relying on one exceptionally intelligent model, you can take this kind of raw intelligence capability, farm it across many models, and then actually find more. This is something that we've proven. We can actually find bugs that Mythos has missed. And we're doing this together with the open source community. For example, Hugging Face models and, GPT 5.4. And again, like, doing this for free means that there's a certain degree of asymmetry right now that's being held by Anthropic. That asymmetry will decline. And to your point, we will have other actors also capable of doing this. So it's about giving defenders the leverage here to figure out their own issues and fix them.